Hello YouTube, how's it going? This is the crossover and I'm back with another video. Today I'm going to be starting a new series where I break down my top 10 players at each position. So today's video is going to be about the centers, and then my next video is going to be about the power forwards, so on and so forth. So as previously stated, today's video is going to be about the centers. So without any further ado, let's get right into the video. Before I get into my top 10, I have three honorable mentions that I quickly wanted to talk about. First up, I have Christian Wood, the center for the Houston Rockets, who averaged 21 and 9 this previous season. I'm a big fan of Christian Wood on the offensive end of the floor, with his ability to not only space the floor, but be a great rim roller, with his slender frame and his quick feet at his 6'10", 6'11" size is very valuable in today's end of the floor on the offensive side of the floor. I do have some slight shooting concerns for him going forward, whether or not his shooting is legit or not, just given, how poor of a free throw shooter he was compared to his 3-point percentages, whether or not his scoring production was, due to, him in fact getting that much better, or was it just due to the Houston Rockets roster being in a flux this previous season, with people being in and out, injuries, people being released, and so on and so forth. So we'll see how he adapts to players such as Jalen Green or Alperen Sengun being incorporated into the roster for this upcoming season. But I'm very high on him offensively. But the reason why I have him outside of my top 10 is due to his defensive concerns. Christian Wood is due for a couple highlight blocks here and there, but due to his slim frame, he gets bullied down low in the post by pretty much every other big man. Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic, Anthony Davis, they all put him in a blender whenever they play Christian Wood, because it's not just from Houston, but it was also in his late Detroit days. He gets bullied in the post, and you would think that with his quick feet, he would be a much better perimeter defender than he is. A much better pick and roll defender, but that's not the case. He struggles with guarding both the roll man and when he gets switched onto the ball handler. So Christian Wood is a strong negative defensively, but a very positive impact player offensively. But I do have some slight concerns moving forward about him on that end of the floor. Again, whether or not it's real, or was it just due to the usage, because this Houston Rockets team was just that bad this previous season. But Christian Wood is still in consideration for the top 10 centers in this league. Moving forward to Kristaps Porzingis, my next honorable mention was probably the worst year of his career, honestly. He struggled. We could start off on the defensive end of the floor. He's never been a big man who was able to, switch out and cover, guards in pick and roll situations. He's always been abused because of his 7'3" frame, on the perimeter, which is fine. His value has always been, in his rim protection, and that has really fallen off a cliff. He's always been skinny, but now that, due to all his lower body, injuries, he just can't get up the same way he could before. Defenders they could pick him apart. They could get him switched out onto guards or forwards, and you could blow by him, or you can just move. Bigger, stronger guards or forwards can just move him out the way, just because of how thin his frame is. And then on the offensive end, he struggled in the post this previous season, from the mid post, the low post. Really has no moves down there. Wasn't even that great of a pick and roll partner for Luka Doncic, or a pick and pop partner for Luka Doncic, as you might think. So it really struggled to create his own shot. And you might be thinking, well, why do you have Kristaps Porzingis in the honorable mentions? Well, he still is Kristaps Porzingis. He still had a better season compared to most. It's just, the expectations of Kristaps Porzingis to be that championship level second option for Luka Doncic, which he just has completely not lived up to on both sides of the floor, really. But this is the first offseason in a while that he's going to have to work on his body, work on his confidence, work on his confidence in his knees, his lower legs, which should be very important. Get his quickness back, add some muscle, work on some moves in the post. So hopefully Kristaps Porzingis comes back stronger next year. Moving on to my final honorable mention, I have Al Horford of the Oklahoma City Thunder, who is now back in his previous destination, or two destinations ago, in Boston. But this previous season he played for the Oklahoma City Thunder, and as another player I have slight concerns of whether or not it was his production this year was due to being on a poor roster, but I still think that all of his qualities will translate to winning basketball yet again. And he had a horrible year in Philly, but that was really due to the fit. I don't think he was that bad of a player. I think Elton Brand signing, Al Horford to play alongside Joel Embiid. It's two centers. I mean, it's just not going to work, especially when you have Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris already on the roster. But Al Horford, perfect pick and roll partner with Shea. He could just fade off of every screen to the 3-point line, was a very good shooter for a big man this past season, was a great playmaker, decent in the post on the opportunities that he did get, and was a very solid defender. Not what he once was in Boston, but a very solid defender. For this Oklahoma City team, was the second best player for them and had great synergy with Shea, and even despite how old he is, was really a modern day big man, a guy who can play make a little, facilitate a little bit, right around the post for his size. Was a great shooter for his size, spaced the floor for Shea. Could even take advantage of some smaller guards in the post, and was a very sound defender. Wasn't the best at covering, guards, but, did a decent job, and I thought was a solid enough presence in the middle in the paint to warrant having, a positive impact grade, for Al Horford. So these three honorable mentions, I could definitely see all three of these players moving into the top 10 this upcoming season if they were right on the cusp. But again, these are three players that were in contention for my top 10, but just didn't make the list. To start off my list, I have Myles Turner coming in at number 10, who averaged 12 points, 6 rebounds, and 3.4 blocks for the Indiana Pacers this previous season. We can start off on the defensive side of the floor. Myles Turner is one of the best, not only big men, but best defenders in this league. Being one of the best rim protectors, in the NBA, having a league leading 3.4 blocks per game. And he's also a serviceable defender in terms of, switching out onto guards and forwards, in pick and roll switching situations. He's not the best at it, but I think he does, a serviceable job for his center. But, his real value on that end of the floor comes in his rim protection. He's a menace this past season. I think was the best in terms of rim protecting this previous season in his entire career. And was an all defensive, was earned himself all defensive, player considerations, and as well as defensive player of the year considerations. His slight on that end of the floor is that, due to he is about like 6'10", and he is a bit thinner for a center, so he does struggle with, some of the bigger centers in the league, such as, Nikola Jokic or Joel Embiid. But, not being able to hold your own against guys like that is, those are freaks of nature, two of the greatest players in the NBA. So, to not be able to truly bang with those guys isn't, really a negative. But, on the offensive side of the floor, he has never really taken off like many have expected him to, including me. But he hasn't really been able to show off any rim rolling abilities this past season due to playing alongside Domantas Sabonis, who really dominates inside the paint. Myles Turner has really been relegated to a spot up role this past season from behind the arc, spacing the floor for Sabonis and Brogdon as well. And he shot a decent percentage. He took about 4 threes per game, shot right around 33%, which is, one of the lowest. I believe it's the second lowest shooting percentage in his career. And I think Myles Turner has a lot more to offer on the offensive end outside of just, catch and shooting. I think he needs to get, I think Myles Turner can shoot, but that shouldn't be the only thing he's doing on that side of the floor. Think he has some rim rolling abilities, and I think he does have a soft enough touch that he can get some post opportunities. But then again, he's not no offensive engine, but he's a very serviceable, offensive big. So all in all, Myles Turner is one of the best two-way bigs in this league, being arguably the best rim protector in the league this previous season, leading the league in blocks, was a serviceable player in terms of, switching out, onto guards and forwards. Can't really bang with the biggest of the bigs, but it's how, it's Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic. Like, come on. But again, one of the best rim protectors in the league, serviceable job switching out onto the perimeter, and could space the floor pretty well for a big man. So Myles Turner does come in at number 10. Moving on to number 9, I have Clint Capela, the starting center for the Atlanta Hawks, who averaged 15 points, 4 rebounds, and 2 blocks for them this previous season. Is probably the best rim rolling big, in the NBA. In terms of that archetype of player. Is probably the most successful in today's NBA. One of the most efficient role men in this league. Being paired up with Trae Young is really a match made in heaven for both players. In terms of giving Trae Young, that lob threat, where he can throw it anywhere, up at the rim, and Clint Capela will go get it. and Clint Capela in terms of having such a high level, uh, you know, playmaker and facilitator in Trae Young, to feed him buckets around the rim. Offensively, that's really all he does. Besides he's a very good screen setter as a center. Have to mention that as well. But his value comes in his gravity around the rim, and similar to a role of a Rudy Gobert, but just not as good as a Rudy Gobert in terms of that presence that he has around the rim kind of opens up open looks for other shooters on the court. But it's a similar impact to Rudy Gobert, but just not nearly as much gravity as a Rudy Gobert. But Clint Capela is still one of the best role men in this league and one of the most efficient role men in this league. And as well as on the defensive end of the floor, he was probably the best defensive rebounder in basketball this previous season, and was also a very good offensive rebounder as well. Forgot to mention that, but was arguably the best defensive rebounder in basketball this previous season, led the league in rebounds this previous season. Doesn't do the best job in the world in terms of covering guards on the perimeter, but is a very good presence around the rim. Doesn't get as many blocks as a Myles Turner, but is definitely a sound defensive big man. And then again, was similar to Myles Turner, was got all defensive considerations of this previous season, and is one of the better defenders, if not one of the best defenders, in this league, especially at that center position. So all in all, one of the best rim rollers in the game, one of the best screen setters in the game. Super efficient around the rim, great offensive rebounder. And then on the defensive end, arguably the best defensive rebounder in the game. One of the best big men defenders in the league. Not the best in terms of switching onto the bigs, but on switching onto the perimeter. Excuse me. But he does a serviceable job. But his real value comes around the rim, and as well as his defensive rebounding. In my opinion, he is the best defensive rebounder, and he was the best rebounder, in all of basketball this previous season. The reason why I have him ahead of Myles Turner is just because of his efficiency offensively. I think that again, Myles Turner hasn't been put in the best situation to succeed. But again, Clint Capela has, and we've seen the results. And Clint Capela was the starting center for a conference finals team with the Atlanta Hawks this previous season. And, his value as a rebounder, which is an area that Myles Turner really struggles with, leads me to put Clint Capela over, Myles Turner. Moving on to number 8, I have Jonas Valanciunas, who was the starting center for the Memphis Grizzlies this previous season, who now plays for the New Orleans Pelicans. But for the Grizzlies last season, he averaged 17 points and 12 rebounds. And, despite what the media might tell you with the Ja Morant hype train, Jonas Valanciunas was, in fact, Memphis's best and most consistent player, this previous season. We can start off defensively where there's nothing to really praise him about, due to how overwhelmingly big he is and how slow-footed he is. He gets cooked by guards and forwards alike on the perimeter, and he didn't oftentimes get switched onto the perimeter because Taylor Jenkins kind of recognized that, and kind of had Jonas Valanciunas in kind of like a drop scheme. Kind of had the Grizzlies in a drop scheme. When Jonas Valanciunas was involved, and it benefited him having a bunch of other twos, threes, who were tough, physical, aggressive on that end of the floor, and Dillon Brooks and Desmond Bane and Grayson Allen and DeAnthony Melton, so on and so forth. So he didn't really have to worry about switching onto perimeter players, but he can't really do that. And down low in the paint, he's not much of a presence. He scratch that he is a presence, but not as much as like an Anthony Davis or like a Mitchell Robinson, because he lacks that vertical presence to really intimidate opposing players, right? He's not going to have any blocks where you're like wow, or like Mitchell Robinson will like reach like above the box and just grab a ball, right? That's Jonas Valanciunas can't do that. But because, again, of how overwhelmingly physical he is, teams do struggle, guards and forwards do struggle with, finishing through contact around him, because he pretty much is, a tree down there in the paint. And, big men can't just move him out the way. So, he's not a positive impact defender, but, he can be serviceable in certain aspects and certain roles, on that side of the floor. But his real value comes on the offensive end where, down low, he's a bucket, with his overwhelming size, his soft touch. He's a good mid-range shooter for a center, again, with that soft touch, has a couple moves down low. He has a good spin move down there in the post, a good hook off his shoulders. Very good player down low in the post, and doesn't take a lot of 3-pointers. I believe he took right around one attempt, or probably even below 1 attempt per game, but shot a respectable percentage. When he did take the few threes that he did take, and as a rim roller, he doesn't offer. He's not one of the best rim rollers in the league, just because of, again, how slow footed he is. But when he did get the ball and rim rolling, when he was rim rolling, just because of how big he is, defenders couldn't really do much with him. He could kind of just move people out the way as he pleased, and was a rebounding machine this past season. On both the defensive side of the floor and the offensive side of the floor, which is very important. Defensive rebounding for a center is very important, and is again, one of the reasons why I have Myles Turner at number 10 is just because of how poor of a rebounder he was, out only averaging about 6 rebounds per game. Clint Capela being the best defensive rebounder, best rebounder in basketball period this past season, and Jonas Valanciunas being as strong as a rebounder as he is, on top of the offensive versatility and how good he was on the offensive side of the floor, is the reason that I have him as high as I do, at number 8. Moving on to number 7, I have Nikola Vucevic, who was the starting center for the Orlando Magic through the first half of the season, and then was later traded, at the trade deadline to the Chicago Bulls. And with the Bulls, at the end of the season, he averaged 21 points, 11 rebounds, and about 3 assists per game. Defensively, there's not much to talk about with Nikola Vucevic. Similar to Jonas Valanciunas, is a decent. Let's just keep it a bug. Nikola Vucevic is not a defender, but he's just such an overwhelmingly positive impact, player on the offensive end, that warrants him being as high as he is on this list. Offensively, he could do it all. He's a dominant post presence, one of the best post players in the NBA, on both sides of the post. Super soft touch, has a plethora of moves down there. Is a pretty solid mid-range shooter. Is much more of a three-point shooter and a post player than he is a mid-range shooter, but is still a solid mid-range shooter, due to his soft touch. One of the better free throw shooting bigs in this league, and as well as arguably, outside of, a player that we'll get to in a bit, the best, three-point shooting big in the league, shot right around 5 or 6 attempts with Orlando and shot 40%, and later a number of attempts with Chicago and shot right around 39-38%, with Chicago. So just an overwhelmingly dominant player on the offensive end, for both Orlando and Chicago, being, again, one of the best, shooting bigs in this league, from both the 3-point arc and the mid-range as well. He's a better 3-point shooter and a post player than he is a mid-range shooter, but again, he's just that good of a player that, even if the mid-range isn't really his best skill, he's still amongst the best big men in the league at, being a mid-range shooter. Not much of a role man just because of his lack of athleticism, but he makes up for it, again, with his 3-point shooting and his overwhelming post presence. He's an easy 22, 24 points per game, and again, being one of the better to best rebounders, in the league. It warrants Nikola Vucevic being this high. And, again, I do value defensive, impact for a big man. I think, in order to have a championship level team, you need to have, a solid defensive big man. And, I'm not sure how high Nikola Vucevic, team's ceiling is, just because of his limits on that side of the floor. But, just he's an extremely high floor raiser of a center, just because of how dominant he is on the offensive end of the floor. And again, if he was just, an average, defensive center, he would be much higher on this list. But just because of how poor he is defensively in terms of, switching onto perimeter players, and even handling bigs down low, despite how good of a rebounder he is, he does really struggle in, all those other defensive facets, which is why I have him as low as I do. Again, Nikola Vucevic is one of the best offensive centers in this league, but, his defensive struggles, limits him to being number 7 on my list. Moving on to number 6, I have DeAndre Ayton, the starting center for the Phoenix Suns, who averaged 14 points, 11 rebounds, and a block per game this previous season, and upped that in the playoffs to 15 points and 11 rebounds per game. Now, DeAndre Ayton, in my opinion, is one of the more overrated players in the NBA. A lot of people seem to believe that he is, an all-star, all-star, superstar level talent at that center position. In my opinion, he's just not that. Now, don't get me wrong. I have him as the 6th best center in the league. In my opinion, he's one of the most versatile centers in the league, in terms of being able to switch onto the perimeter. I don't think he does the best job in the world of switching onto the perimeter. I don't think he does the best job in the world of protecting the paint either, but he does a serviceable job at both of those aspects of the defensive on defense. And, he is a pretty solid rebounder, again, averaging right around 10 to 11 rebounds per game in both the regular season and the playoffs. And offensively, one of the best rim rollers in the league. And again, a player who can take advantage of switches, right? He's not he's not a big man where you could just switch, a guard onto him and he won't, you can't just feed him the ball and have him take advantage of that switch, right? He will take advantage of, smaller players. Does have some post moves, but I think he could definitely get, better, develop much more of a bag. Does have a soft touch and is a very good free throw shooter at that center position. So I do expect, his bag to continue to develop over time. But as of at this point in his career, he is a star in his role, right? Being one of the most efficient rim rollers in the league this past season. Having guys like Chris Paul and Devin Booker feed him the ball right around the rim. He was thriving off of that. Wasn't asked to create his own shot. Just play his role to the best of his ability, and he did that. So you can't take that away from him. And being one of the most versatile bigs, again, on the defensive floor in terms of both switching and protecting the paint, and in terms of being a very solid rebounder in his own right. You have to give DeAndre Ayton his props. And I expect his bag to continue to develop on the offensive end, and him to really take that next step in his career and become that star alongside Devin Booker. As CP enters or is in the twilight years of his career. I think DeAndre Ayton does struggle with bigger centers. I think he did a solid job on Nikola Jokic, but again, Nikola Jokic was pretty much the only player on the court for Denver. With Jamal Murray being out and Michael Porter Jr. Having his struggles. So I think he did a solid job on Nikola Jokic, but we really saw his lack of physicality. I think he's definitely gotten better with his physicality, but I think he has to continue to grow in that aspect. We saw that when he played Giannis in the finals. So DeAndre Ayton, again, one of the best two-way big men in this league, one of the most versatile big men in this league. In terms of being able to attack switches. One of the best rim rollers in the league, and again, one of the most versatile defenders, in this league. So I think he's a great center. I have him at number 6. Can't put him any higher, but I think he will, eventually get higher than number 6 as his career continues to progress. Moving on to number 5, I have Bam Adebayo of the Miami Heat, who averaged 19 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists this previous season. Bam, not much that needs to be said about Bam. One of the best defenders in the league this previous season, earned an all-defensive team for 2 years straight now, and again was in the running for Defensive Player of the Year. One of the arguably the best big men in terms of being able to switch out onto the perimeter. I'd say him and Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis is more of a power forward, but I'd say him and Bam Adebayo are the best in terms of being able to switch onto the perimeter and as well as protect the paint. Not much that needs to be said about Bam Adebayo on the defensive end of the floor. I mean, he's elite. He's one of the best, not just centers in the league, but best defenders in the league. Period. I put him in the top 10 defensive players in the league conversation. As a solid rebounder, I think he needs to continue to grow as a rebounder. Needs to continue to grow his fill out his frame. Needs to continue to get bigger. But part of what makes Bam Adebayo so special is his ability to move. How quick he is on his feet, similar to like a Christian Wood, but much bigger than a Christian Wood. In my opinion. And on the offensive end of the floor is where I really struggle with Bam Adebayo because, you look at the stats and you'd say, well, his points per game has continued to progress to the point where he's a 19-point per game scorer. And, the stats would tell you that, he's developing on that end of the floor, but I think that's just not the case. The stat increase is really due to, usage and the fact that, a lot of Miami's roster was in and out, due to COVID and injuries. So it's much more due to usage than how much better he's gotten. He doesn't have a post game, which is really why, I struggle to put Bam Adebayo any higher than 5, even though he really has the talent to be, much higher. His struggles on the offensive side of the floor in terms of creating his own shot really limits, his ceiling, in terms of these rankings, and as well as Miami's ceiling in general, because he is the second best player, on that team. But again, he's a very efficient rim roller and operating as a hub out of the post in terms of finding his teammates, cutting. He has probably the best two-man game in the league with him and Duncan Robinson. Not many other players come to mind in terms of the chemistry that they have with that two-man game. But again, as a facilitator on the offensive end of the floor, and as a rim roller on the end of the floor, Bam Adebayo holds great value. Probably the best facilitator up to this point that we've listed. And being the best defender to this point that we've listed, both in terms of being able to switch onto the perimeter and guard the paint as well, and being a solid rebounder. But what I struggle with Bam Adebayo is his lack of his self creation skills, which despite his point total continuing to increase, that's it's more due to usage than rather his actual development. So I think he needs it's crucial for him to develop in that department, and it's the reason why I can't put Bam Adebayo any higher than number 5, despite how overwhelmingly positive his impact is on the defense of the floor, and as well as his facilitating and rim rolling abilities on the offensive end. It's his lack of being able to create his own shot that really limits his impact. And I can't put him any higher than number 5 due to that self-creation, due to his self-creation limitations. Moving on to number 4, I have Rudy Gobert of the Utah Jazz, who averaged 14 points, 13 rebounds, and 2.7 blocks per game this previous season. I think Rudy Gobert is the most overhated player in the NBA. I don't really understand the hate that he gets outside of this COVID situation, but still, Rudy Gobert. We could just start off on the defensive end. He's a top 3 defense by himself. When you take into account the lack of defenders, period. Positive impact defenders on this Utah roster. This previous 2 seasons, as a matter of fact, and Rudy Gobert still being able to carry this defense, to be a top 3 defense is insane. He's 3-time defensive player of the year award winner. Not much needs to be stated. His defensive limitations in the playoffs is completely overstated. Donovan Mitchell is not a good defender. Mike Conley is not the defender he used to be. Royce O'Neal is a solid defender, but again, he's only like 6'4", 6'5", so he's not going to guard a Kawhi Leonard or a Paul George. Bojan Bogdanovic is a liability. Joe Ingles is a liability. Rudy Gobert has to cover all their mistakes, protect the paint, and get out the 3-point shooters, and people want to hate him for that. And Joel Embiid is not being asked to do that. Anthony Davis is not. All those guys have, Ben Simmons, Matisse Thybulle, LeBron James, and to a lesser degree, your KCPs and your Alex Caruso's, but all those guys have other very good, talented defensive players, and you can't ask Rudy Gobert to literally do everything for you on defense. That is completely insane. I don't understand the hate that Rudy Gobert gets. He's a top 3 defense by himself. If Utah had 1 or 2 more, strong positive impact defenders, there's no doubt in my mind they would be most likely in the finals. They would have played Milwaukee in the finals this previous season. But again, Rudy Gobert is a top 3 defense by himself. He's the best rim protector in the NBA, best paint protector, does a solid job guarding, guards, and as well as switching and, as covering 3-point shooters as well. You just can't ask, a 7-footer to do all 3 of those things at the same time, right? It's impossible. So besides that, on the offensive end of the floor, he's arguably the best rim roller in the league. I'd say probably, you can make an argument, again, with, you can put him in that tier with Anthony Davis, right? Because just how big he is, how long he is, not really all that much of a leaper, but again, just how long his arms are, automatically puts him in that conversation. And his gravity as a roll man with often Utah putting 4 shooters around him with the ball handler, his gravity creates open looks for those shooters. Rudy Gobert has gotten really good at being able to find those shooters. Once the guard hits him, with the pass out of the pick and roll. So he's done a great job, being able to find these shooters again. So his gravity as a roll man. He averaged 14 points per game, and his shot. The amount of shots that he's gotten has gone down and down. So there's no doubt in my with how efficient he is. Rudy Gobert could easily average anywhere from 17 to 20 points per game. If Utah was looking for him and if he was selfish, but he's playing within his role. He was finding his teammates, getting people open shots, got much better as a facilitator out of being a role man. With how much gravity he creates on the offensive end, one of the best players in this league. And, that on top of, his defensive impact and, given the fact that he's just a top 3 defense by himself, not much needs to be stated. I mean, he's the most hated player in the NBA, and I really don't understand the hate. Again, he's a top 3 defense by himself. You can't expect a 7-footer to do everything when he's the only positive impact defender out there. And again, top 3 defense by himself, and the gravity that creates on offense, along with being one of the best rim rolling bigs in the league, and as well as being one of the best facilitators and passers, at that center position, out of finding open men, spotting up, in not only the corners, but on the wings as well. Rudy Gobert is easily, the 4th best center, in the league. At number 3, I have Karl-Anthony Towns of the Minnesota Timberwolves, who this previous season averaged 24 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. To start off, let me just say condolences to the Towns family. His mother did die of COVID, and he himself did catch COVID. So, he stated multiple times that, like, his mind wasn't really on basketball this previous season, and he still messed around and averaged 24, 10, and 4. And that just shows you how good of a talent Karl-Anthony Towns is. And, similar to how Rudy Gobert is the most hated player in the league, Karl-Anthony Towns is probably the most underrated player in this league just because of the situation that he is in Minnesota. But on the offensive side of the floor, he's the best shooting big man of all time. He took right around 6 threes per game, and they weren't just catch and shoot. They were, dribbles, step back, side steps, at that 6'10", 6'11" frame, and he still hit 38% of them, and that's a down year for him. He's the best shooting big man of all time, and as well as being a dominant post, in the presence. And under Chris Finch in the second half of Minnesota's season, he did unlock Karl-Anthony Towns in terms of being a playmaker and being a hub in the post. He did a great job of finding teammates cutting, and I think he can have a great 2-man game going forward with Anthony Edwards. I mean, come on, Karl-Anthony Towns is the best shooting big man of all time, one of the best passers, one of the best passing bigs in the NBA, and one of the best post players in the NBA. There's nothing he can't do on offense in terms of being a pretty solid, rim roller. Not the most athletic player in the world, but he does have some sneaky athleticism to him. So offensively, he's one of the best offensive players, in this league, and I expect those numbers to only grow and his efficiency to get better, as he gets his, mental right, coming off of the tragedies that he endured this previous season. So I expect him to just continue to get better on that side of the floor, moving forward. And then defensively, he's, coming into the NBA, it was supposed to be the opposite. He was supposed to struggle a bit offensively, but be a dominant defensive player. And, it's proved to be the opposite of that throughout his career so far. But defensively, I think he's gotten better. In the beginning of his career, he was pretty bad, but I think he's gotten to average, probably below average. I think the big reason is just his foot speed. I think his technique and his IQ, I think, has gotten better. But I think in terms of in pick and roll coverages, you got to keep in mind that similar to Rudy Gobert, nobody on that Minnesota team is a good defender. Right? D'Angelo Russell's one of the worst defenders, one of the 10 worst defensive players, in the league. Anthony Edwards is not a good defender. Nobody on that team is a good defender. So, it's really Karl-Anthony Towns on an island. And again, Karl-Anthony Towns in pick and roll situations has to cover 2 people. Because the ball handler most of the times, 10 times out of 10 is not a good defender. So Karl-Anthony Towns is really covering 2 people. So I think, if Karl-Anthony Towns was in a better situation, a better environment, I think he would look much better defensively if he had the pieces around him. Even if he just had a couple like average defenders, I think he would look better than he does. So again, I think Karl-Anthony Towns is the most underrated player in the NBA, probably along with like De'Aaron Fox, but still he's right in that conversation. One of the best offensive players in this league, not just out of the center position. And again, my belief of that at that center position you need a solid defender. Again, with a player like Karl-Anthony Towns, it's just completely negated just because of how good of an offensive player he is. And I think he's not so bad to the point where he would hinder a championship level team. I think with adequate pieces around him on that defensive side of the floor, he would be at the very least average on that side of the floor. And again, offensively, he's a dominant post presence, sneaky athleticism in terms of being a rim roller, very good in the mid range. An awesome hub. It really been unlocked as a passer this previous season. I think that's going to continue to grow next season. I think you could definitely take advantage of like Anthony Edwards cutting, and you could have Anthony Edwards coming off a floppy set, but instead of coming out to shoot a 3, you could have him cutting to the basket, and then Towns could find him right around there in terms of maybe throwing him a lob or just a bounce pass to get him the ball right around the paint, and then Karl-Anthony Towns being the best 3-point shooting big of all time, it definitely warrants him being the 3rd best center on my list. Moving on to number 2, I have Joel Embiid, starting center for the Philadelphia 76ers, who this previous season averaged 28.5 points per game and 12 rebounds per game. Not much needs to be said about Joel Embiid. I mean, he's one of, if not, I'd put him right in the conversation with Rudy Gobert and Anthony Davis for being the best defender in the league. With arguably, along with those two, the most impactful defender in the league. His presence around the rim doesn't need to be stated. I think he's gotten slightly better at switching on to perimeter plays. I don't think he's better than, like a Bam Adebayo or like a DeAndre Ayton or even a Myles Turner at that. But I think he does do a solid job, when he does try, because, a big part of Joel Embiid is effort. But as terms of, his presence in the paint and being a shot blocker, not doesn't have like the numbers of, like a Myles Turner or a Rudy Gobert, but it's still, a top three. I put him, Anthony Davis, and Rudy Gobert as my top three defenders, in this league. So not much needs to be stated for Joel Embiid on that end of the floor. And then offensively, again, argue probably outside from the guy that we're gonna get to in a few moments, is the best, post player in this league. Just all the moves that he has down there, his ability to garner fouls as well. Arguably the best free throw shooting big in the league. Took a lot of free throws and shot them in a respectable 85% clip, and can space the floor as well. Didn't take as many threes as he did last year. 2 years ago with the Al Horford, Josh Richardson team, but he did take right around 2-3 threes per game and shot right around 36%, which is respectable. Joel Embiid is a two-way monster, one of the best two-way players in this league. A top 10 player in this league. Not much needs to be stated. But the reason why I couldn't put him over Nikola Jokic is just because of Nikola Jokic is, I guess we'll get to Nikola Jokic in a second, but Joel Embiid's lack of being able to feed and find his teammates off of double teams and so on and so forth, and his lack of being able to really get his teammates involved, which Nikola Jokic does excel at, and his injury concerns, and he does have some slight effort concerns, is the reason that I don't have him ahead of Jokic. But again, it's splitting hairs between him and Nikola Jokic, but Joel Embiid is still Joel Embiid. Is one of the 10 best players in this league. His defensive impact, especially around the rim, his offensive impact in down low, and his ability to space the floor. One of the best free throw shooters is the best free throw shooter at that center position. So again, it's Joel Embiid. Not much needs to be stated. And finally, at number 1, we have the reigning MVP of the NBA, Nikola Jokic, the starting center for the Denver Nuggets, who this previous season averaged 26 points, 10 rebounds, and 8 assists. That stat line coming out of a center is just insane. I mean, not much needs to be stated about Nikola Jokic. I mean, he's the best passing big not only in the NBA, but he's the best passing big of all time. And in my opinion, he's the best playmaker in the NBA. You can make an argument he's the best hub in the NBA. His ability, to find his teammates is just incredible. I not much to say about Nikola Jokic. His ability, he's right there with Joel Embiid in terms of being one of the best free throw shooting bigs in the league, and his ability to draw fouls is also impressive as well. Again, doesn't take many threes, similar to Joel Embiid. Right around 3 per game, similar to him, but does hit them at right around a 38% clip, which is very good for the amount of attempts he does take, and considering that most of them aren't the most open looks. And again, a dominant presence in the paint, and his ability to find teammates. Again, he's the best passer and playmaker in the league, not just at the center position, was just completely incredible. I think he's gotten better defensively. I'd say he's right around average, below average, similar to Karl-Anthony Towns, but he's surrounded with much better defensive talent than Karl-Anthony Towns. So his weaknesses are hidden on that side of the floor, obviously due to his lack of speed and athletic prowess. He's not able to stay in front of the best of guards or forwards, and but he is a pretty solid presence, similar to Jonas Valanciunas in the paint, just because of how big he is. Even though he does look pudgy, don't get it twisted. Being 6'11" and that at that weight, it's hard for players to finish around him in the paint, and he's a very solid rebounder as well for his size. And again, not much needs to be stated about Nikola Jokic. The reason why I have him over Joel Embiid, it is splitting hairs, but his ability as a playmaker at that position is just incredible. And he's just healthier more often than not than Joel Embiid. So that availability is the best ability. So it's splitting hairs, but Nikola Jokic is the best passer in the NBA. not just at the center position, is a Hall of Fame talent. Both him and Joel Embiid, but more Nikola Jokic is for sure, arguably already a Hall of Fame talent. And he's a top 6-7 player in this league. Again, not much to be stated. Nikola Jokic is the best center in the league. And that's in the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comment section what you agree with, what you disagree with. Would you take Joel Embiid over Jokic? Or would you take Jokic over Embiid? Or would you take Towns over Gobert, Gobert over Towns? Would you take Ayton over Bam Adebayo? Would you take Vucevic over some of these guys? Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with in the comment section. Please subscribe if you haven't already. It would mean so much. I want to continue to grow this channel. I'm really proud of the progress that I have done, in the little amount of time that I have been on this platform. But again, please subscribe if you haven't already, and please share with a friend. I want to continue to grow, grow the community that I have so far, on this platform. But again, that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And next video is going to be about the power forward, so stay tuned for that. Peace. Have a good day, you guys.